January 17, 1944. The air over the Italian peninsula is brittle, a crystalline blue that belies the rot of the campaign below. High above the jagged peaks of the Apennines, the silence is absolute, broken only by the distant, rhythmic thrum of a Daimler-Benz engine. A veteran pilot of the Luftwaffe, an ace with the Knight's Cross gleaming at his throat, adjusts his goggles. He scans the horizon, expecting the familiar silhouettes of Spitfires or the lumbering bulk of B-17s. He is a product of the most disciplined military machine in history, a man who believes in the inevitability of his triumph and the superiority of his steel. But the horizon is not empty. Emerging from the sun are twin-tailed shadows, silent predators moving with a velocity that defies his calculations. These are the P-38 Lightnings, the fork-tailed devils, and within seconds, the disciplined sky will dissolve into a symphony of fire and lead. By early 1944, the Wehrmacht was no longer the unstoppable force that had swept across Europe in 1940. The Mediterranean theater had become a meat grinder, a secondary front that was rapidly draining the Reich of its most precious resource, experienced pilots. The German High Command viewed the Italian front as a defensive necessity, a place to hold the soft underbelly of Europe against the rising tide of Allied material power. To the German aces, men who had survived the frozen hell of the Eastern Front and the swirling dogfights of the Channel, the American presence was initially
viewed with a mixture of professional respect and ideological dismissal. They expected a fight, certainly, but they anticipated a traditional war of attrition where German skill would eventually blunt American numbers. They did not expect the sheer, crushing weight of industrial abundance that was about to be unleashed from the clouds. On the dusty roads winding through the Leary Valley, German supply convoys moved under the cover of what they hoped was a fading winter mist. Soldiers huddled in the backs of Opel Blitz trucks, their hands wrapped around tin mugs of ersatz coffee, a bitter, burnt-grain substitute that served as a constant reminder of the Reich's tightening belt. This was the German reality: scarcity, substitution, and the grim determination to hold ground. Above them, the Luftwaffe aces patrolled, their fuel gauges a constant source of anxiety. Every gallon of high-octane aviation spirit was a miracle of logistics, snatched from a dwindling stockpile. They flew with the precision of men who knew they could not afford a single mistake, for there were no replacements waiting at the airfield. Then came the sound. It was not the high-pitched scream of a dive bomber, but a deep, guttural roar that seemed to vibrate the very marrow of their bones. The P-38s descended like vengeful gods. Unlike the German aircraft, which were honed for specific roles, the Lightning was a testament to American versatility and excess. It carried 4.50 caliber machine guns and a 20mm cannon, all concentrated in the nose. There was no need for synchronization gear. There was only a concentrated stream of lead that could saw a transport truck in half in a single pass. As the strafing began, the German aces watched from above, paralyzed by a sight they could not reconcile with their training. They saw their convoys, the lifeblood of their defense, shattered not by a desperate enemy, but by an opponent that seemed to have an infinite supply of everything. The symbolic heart of this disparity was found in the wreckage. After the Lightnings had finished their grim work, leaving the roads choked with burning rubber and the smell of spent cordite, German scavengers would often pick through the remains of downed Allied planes or overrun positions. There, they found the ultimate symbol of their inevitable defeat, the white-wrapped Hershey's chocolate bar. To a German soldier surviving on sawdust bread and synthetic coffee, the sight of a mass-produced, high-quality chocolate bar was more terrifying than a bayonet. It represented a nation so wealthy, so insulated from the ravages of war, that it could afford to send its frontline troops luxuries that a German general could barely obtain. The chocolate was a harbinger of a democracy that didn't just produce weapons, but produced a surplus of joy and energy. It was the taste of a world where the individual was valued enough to be given a treat amidst the slaughter. In the officers' mess back at the Luftwaffe bases, the mood shifted from stoicism to a quiet, frantic desperation. Documented. Reports from the period describe veteran commanders, men with dozens of kills to their names, sending urgent coded teletypes to Berlin. They weren't asking for more ammunition or better tactics. They were begging for a withdrawal of the elite wings to the Reich's interior. They realized that the Lightnings were not just planes, they were the vanguard of a logistical monster. When a P-38 was lost, 2 more took its place by the next dawn. When an American pilot went down, he was often replaced by a fresh, well-fed youth who had flown more training hours than the German ace had flown in combat. The ideology of the superhuman was collapsing under the weight of the super factory. The German pilots began to realize that they weren't fighting a military, they were fighting a civilization that had turned the very act of production into a weapon of war. This realization transformed the German psyche. The arrogance of the early war years evaporated, replaced by a haunting fear of the sky. The sight of the twin booms of the P-38 became a psychological trigger, a signal that the Amis were coming to dismantle their world piece by piece. The Lightnings didn't just strafe convoys, they strafed the German belief in their own destiny. The factual records of the 14th Fighter Group and the 82nd Fighter Group detail mission after mission where German resistance simply melted away or became a frantic scramble for survival. The aces were no longer hunters, they were prey.
Caught in the gears of a democratic machine that ground forward with the relentless beat of 1,000 assembly lines. As the sun sets over the ruins of Monte Cassino, the shadow of the Lightning stretches long across the valley. The war would continue, and many more would fall, but the epiphany of January 1944 remained. The victory of the Allies was not merely won by the bravery of their pilots, though that was immense, but by the philosophy of abundance. The recurring sound of the twin engines and the sight of that simple wrapped chocolate bar told a story that no propaganda could counter. It was the story of a people who believed that freedom was not a limited resource to be hoarded, but a bountiful harvest to be shared. In the end, the German aces did not just retreat from the Lightnings, they retreated from the realization that a society built on the dignity and the provision of the common man will always outlast a regime built on the hollow promise of the elite. The sky belonged to the many, and the few could only watch as their world burned in the wake of the forked-tailed devils.